This is my proposition rebuttal speech. First, I'm going to extend my previous arguments that in my plan, reparations would be given to all African Americans through $250,000, in addition to free pre-K and free college public universities, not from pre-K through college like my opponent incorrectly stated. Now that my arguments are extended, I'm going to rebut my opponent's second contention, also his main contention. My opponent states that all African Americans aren't deserving of reparations, i.e., the rich, powerful people or people who have no slave ancestors. My opponent forgets that slavery isn't the only harm against African Americans in our country's history. In fact, African Americans have been subject to the crimes of 2.5 centuries of slavery, in addition to 60 years of Jim Crow-style segregation and decades more of racist housing policies, zoning, and community development, some of which continue today. To say these African Americans don't deserve this money would be a crime to humanity, as most, if not all, black people suffer from at least subliminal racism in today's society, not to mention in the past. On to my opponent's example of how taking money for this plan from the military/defense budget would lead to the fall of the United States. Here are the real facts. For starters, my opponent ignores that my plan would only be cutting the defense budget by 0.01, repeating 6%, a relatively small cut. Not to mention that the military budget has been decreasing annually over the past few years via much larger cuts. For instance, in 2012-2013, there was over a $60 billion cut on military spending that resulted in every component of the military getting cut by as little as 3% or as much as 59.5%. Not to forget that the construction budget underwent a 29% budget cut that year, and our country still seems to be doing okay. In my opponent's example, he infers that my plan would cut the military construction component as a whole, but what this ignores is this isn't how budget cuts actually work. When you have to cut a budget, you aren't going to cut a whole component. How you go about doing it is cutting a little bit from each component, some more than others based on things like flexibility and deemed how important that component is. With all this in mind, my opponent's arguments that our country would ultimately fall if we had to make these cuts in the military budget should be ignored. Not just ignored, but by cutting military spending now for this plan, GDP would increase over time through less African Americans in poverty, more in the middle class, and more spending in our economy, which would also result in decreased amounts of unemployment and Social Security payments being needed. Given all these factors, down the road we could have significantly more money to spend on our discretionary budget, potentially even on military defense if needed at that moment in time. Now, to my opponent's first point that giving reparations would increase segregation. My opponent doesn't explain in any way how segregation would increase other than saying people's increases in tax money will now be going to African Americans, and doesn't elaborate at all how this results in increased segregation. Keep in mind this point is rendered useless as he said there would be an increase in taxes, which there isn't. My plan solely shifts around money in the discretionary budget to different sections. The budget as a whole doesn't increase at all. Saying more African Americans in college, the workforce, and prominent jobs in the workforce would not decrease segregation is simply incorrect. My opponent's third and final point that giving people money seldom helps to fix their problems is out of context. First off, he stated just giving reparations through money doesn't solve the poverty crisis, but my plan doesn't include just money. It also includes educational benefits. It is not right to withhold money because some African Americans may not help them out of poverty. In this country, you don't receive paychecks because you're going to spend it wisely. You receive it because you earned it. And much like that, African Americans have earned these reparations regardless of how they choose to spend it. Given all these facts, I rested my case that you should undoubtedly vote for the proposition.